Hello and welcome to the webinar, Turn Customer Needs into Business Opportunities. My name is Jim Kalbach. I'm the head of customer success at Mural, and I'm also the author of the book, Mapping Experiences, and I'll be your host for today. In this session, I'm joined by Marc Sniukas and Parker Lee. They're the authors of the best-selling book, The Art of Opportunity. We hosted a webinar with them last year that you can find on our blog. That's blog.mural.co. And I'm happy to have them back here today. So hi, Marc, how are you?
Hi, Jim, I'm fine, thank you. Great to be back again. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah. Hi, Parker.
Jim, how are you? And thank you, everyone, for joining us today.
Great, thanks. So in just a minute, they're going to show us their strategic approach for strategic innovation. And I'm going to jump in and talk a little bit about job mapping as well, too. Before I hand it over to them, I just wanted to highlight a few things. Please follow us on Twitter at Mural, that's at Mural, and you can use the hashtag #ArtOfOp, that's hashtag #ArtOfOp. You can also follow the authors at @ArtOfOp as well, too. So please follow us on Twitter. We'll get out there and retweet and engage you on Twitter. And if you have any questions during the webinar, please enter them in the Q&A pane. The software that we're using for the webinar today has a chat function and a Q&A pane. The Q&A pane is to the left or more towards the center. If you enter your questions in there, we're going to get to them during the webinar, but I'll also come back at the end and take some of your questions live. We'll do that as a group. So without any further ado, let me hand it over to Marc. Marc, take it away.
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, so as Jim mentioned, we wrote a book called The Art of Opportunity, and in The Art of Opportunity, we basically answer just one question, that is, how do established companies create new growth, and how do they do so in innovative ways? Now, the book is based on research that I did at Manchester Business School, looking at companies and into companies and trying to figure out how they achieved so, and also based on the experience that we have working with companies to achieve these things. And one of the particular things that we discovered while working with these companies is that they have a new approach for looking at strategy. And this new approach for looking at strategy is characterized by three very distinct things. So on the one hand, they have a new strategy framework, so a new way of looking at the traditional questions of strategy. They apply a new process, and all of this, the new process and looking at strategy in a new way, is fostered by a fresh mindset. And today we're going to focus on giving you some insight into that new and innovative framework for looking at strategy. So what we discovered is that in strategy, there are basically three questions that we think you need to answer as a company. So you need to figure out where to play, you need to figure out how you want to play, and you also need to figure out how you want to win. And what we saw now is that on the one hand, there are traditional approaches on how to answer these questions, and these, as we call them, strategic innovators, they take a different approach. I just want to give you a brief overview of these three before we dive deeper into the customer part of that and the where to play part of it. Now, where to play. So traditional strategy says that you need to figure out which industry you want to be in. So we have tools like Porter's 5 Forces, for example, which is all about analyzing the industry and figuring out whether it's a good industry to be in or not. And once you have picked your industry, you might develop some products for that industry and then look for a market. So there needs to be that product market fit. Now, what we saw with the strategic innovators is that they don't care so much about the industry, because usually they are in an industry, so they don't look to go into new industries. And what they care much more about is the customer. So they start with customers, they start with non-customers, they look into understanding customer needs and jobs to be done, and they look into the customer experience, and they use that as the starting point for defining where they want to play, in which customer segments and which needs and which experiences they want to satisfy. When it comes to how to play, one way in traditional strategy says that it's all about you focus either on operational excellence, or you focus on product innovation, or you care about the customer relationship, try to have a strong relationship with your customers. The strategic innovators, on the other hand, they take a what we call holistic approach to innovating their offering and designing their offering, which is the sum of the products, the services, and the customer experience that they bring out. They look at the business model, so they go beyond just purely looking at product innovation or service innovation, for example, to also include business model innovation, and they also look into revenue model innovation. And finally, when it comes to how to win, so traditional strategy again tells you that you need to pick and choose between either you are low cost, or you are different, or you focus on a niche. Now again, the strategic innovators, they don't care so much about these things, but they care about creating value. They care about creating value for the customers, obviously, but also for them as a company. Why else, I mean, would you develop a new strategy or design a new strategy or a new business? It's all about creating value for you as a company. And they increasingly also turn to creating ecosystem value, so creating value for all the partners that you rely on as a business, because if you don't create any value for them, why would they do business with you? Now, so much for a big overview, a high-level overview of where to play, how to win. Let's dive deeper into where to play today, or how to discover an opportunity for new growth. Now, if you're really interested in big-time growth, so I'm talking about, we had in the book, we talk about examples of increasing from revenues from 2 billion to 4 billion, for example. So if you're looking at that type of growth, you're not going to find it in your existing businesses. You're not going to find it in your with your existing customers. But you really you need to turn to customers that are underserved or neglected, what we came to call the non-customers in the book. And when you look at these non-customers, it's all about finding out what are their jobs to be done, what are their needs, and what are the pain points they have currently. And one of the examples that we go into is Cardinal Health. Now, Cardinal Health looked at the process of organizing all the tools that are needed for a operation, for a surgery. And they discovered, so looking at it from a hospital perspective, so they looked into how does organizing all these tools and preparing for surgery look like in a hospital. So they came to see that it's a very painful process, actually. So first of all, the surgeon has to make a list and determine what kind of tools do we want or do I need for this surgery. Then the list is kind of handed off to a nurse, and the nurse has to go to an inventory room where usually they stock thousands of different tools. She has to assemble about 200 tools is what is needed on average for a surgery. So she has to assemble 200 tools manually. She puts them all in a tray, and then they are being transported into the operating room. Now, the process is very time-consuming, and it's obviously very expensive for the hospital because they need to stock all of these things. And it's also very error-prone. Having to handpick 200 tools, quite easy to forget something. Now, Cardinal Health looked at this, and they decided we need to change that. So we need to offer some services to make this job easier and less costly, more convenient for everybody involved. And they came up with an online tool and a service called procedure-based delivery system. So what the online tool, this pack manager, allows the surgeon to do is actually to go through the whole procedure in advance, so online, picking the equipment and supplies that the surgeon prefers. And then what Cardinal does is actually Cardinal assembles a surgical toolkit, packages everything together. The kit is delivered on the morning of the operation to the hospital, and on top of all of this, in the kit, actually all the tools, they are organized in the precise sequence in which they will be used during the operation. So they made the whole process much more convenient for the surgeon, for picking the tools, assembling his personal kit. They eliminated the need to stock thousands of these tools in the hospital, and they eliminated basically all the possibilities for errors here, so making it a whole lot more convenient. Now, Cardinal Health was not in this tool delivery business before. They didn't have that tool, so they started with, as I said, figuring out what are the needs in a hospital which we could possibly target for creating a new business. Now, when looking at needs, you might remember the old saying by the Harvard Business School professor Theodor Levitz, who says, well, people don't want a drill, but they want a hole in the wall. Now, if you take it a step further, they actually don't want a hole in the wall, but it's more about hanging a picture, and it's maybe even not so much about the picture, but it's maybe even more about having a good time looking at the picture and remembering a nice family vacation. So in other words, if you look at customer needs, what you need to look into is functional needs, but also emotional needs and possibly social needs. And Jim is actually going to tell us a little bit more about how you can figure out what needs your customers have that need to be fulfilled. Jim, over to you.
Great. Thanks so much for that, Mark. That's a fascinating perspective and approach that you outlined there, and that is detailed in the book as well too. So just to dovetail a little bit into where you just left off, here's the precise quote from Theodore Levitt, famous Harvard business professor, and he said this in 1960. So this is quite old thinking actually, and it's interesting that we're seeing a kind of a renaissance of kind of getting back to this principle. People don't want a quarter-inch drill, they want a quarter-inch hole. And I think it really goes back to what you were talking about, Mark, in terms of creating value. And I think when you unpack this statement, what really stands behind it is the notion of you create value for the customer first by looking at the market, by looking at the problem that the customer is trying to solve from their perspective. And then you create organizational value, and then you create ecosystem value. But this is really where you need to start. And that's the kind of the theme of the webinar here today, is to look at how customer needs and customer input can be used for strategic growth and innovation. And that brings up the notion of jobs to be done, which I'm going to talk about a little bit in a minute. But I just wanted to highlight that very kind of explicitly. I wanted to kind of contrast these two different perspectives wrapped up in that quote. And the first is buying a drill, right? So I'm a drill manufacturer and I sell drills. I'm going to be focused on selling drills. And I can map out what that experience might look like in a customer journey map. And as the name implies, it's a map of the customer's journey with me as a provider of a product or a service. And you might say, well, they become aware of my brand and they learn about drills and compare mine to other people's, and they decide, and they purchase, right? So this is really about what's the journey of them purchasing my drill, and then they use the drill, and then they might become advocates for it, right? So that's a high-level customer journey map for buying a drill, and that's not bad for an organization to understand. You want to understand that perspective, and doing a customer journey map is one way that you can do that, and I talk about that in my book Mapping Experiences. But I want to contrast that with something that we can then call a job map. And this is really kind of looking at that second part of Theodore Levitt's statement. The job is to make a quarter-inch hole. So if we look at that as a task, as a need, there's an outcome that the customer has. There's a desired need that they have there. They want to make a hole, right? And if we look at the journey there, it looks very different. Right? It's not about them buying a drill, rather it's them planning to drill a hole, and then they might prepare and then confirm, by measuring everything out, and then they execute that job by drilling the hole. They might assess whether it was straight or deep enough, and then they conclude and wrap up, right? So this journey looks very different. It's not about them learning about my brand and making a decision to purchase my product. Rather, it's about them getting their job done. So that brings up the notions of jobs to be done. And jobs to be done isn't about task analysis. It's not about use case either. Rather, it's about a fundamental need, or we can even say it's about a struggle and the experience that someone goes through when trying to achieve a goal. And as Mark pointed out, though, you could even take this thinking one step further. And say, well, I actually don't want a hole in the wall. I actually want to hang a picture, right? The journey might look the same, where I plan to hang the picture, the job map, I should say, might look the same in terms of the steps. But if you reframe it at a different level, instead of my need is to drill a hole, rather my need is to hang a picture, you might come up with a different solution. And here are some sticky hangers, right? So you can add adhesive hangers, right? Maybe I don't even need a hole if the job that I'm trying to do is to hang a picture. And that's how you can use this type of thinking, by shifting your perspective from not how do we sell more drills, but by looking at what is the customer trying to get done. You can actually expand your horizons and move away from just drilling a hole and come up with the idea of adhesive hangers, right? So that's one I think kind of benefit of doing this, and it goes back to Theodore Levitt's quote there, by looking at the job to be done, is that it can expand your horizons strategically by starting with the customer need. And one way to do that is by focusing on the job to be done, as I mentioned. And so I'm showing now this presentation, this part of the presentation in Mural. So I have a mural here that I've pre-formatted in what we call a template. This is filled out with an exercise that my team at Mural is working on right now. But you see, I've taken the whole mural and I've broken it up into a couple of different steps to help a group of people think through a jobs to be done framework. And this particular framework that I'm looking at for this part of the strategic innovation was I'm following the process of a gentleman called Tony Olwick. And he has a book called Jobs to be Done, which really focuses on that core job to be done. I'll give that information at the end of my presentation. But you'll see here in the upper left, I have a workspace here for finding out what the core functional job is. And then we want to look at the job executor. And then we want to do a map of that job here and look at the functional, the social, and the emotional needs there. What are the jobs to be done at each stage of the job map? Let me just zoom into each one of those so you can see how we did this. And I set this up to be a collaborative exercise. So it's not something that one person does, in isolation. I really wanted this to be a team activity. And I think that's an advantage of doing this in Mural, is that you can loop in a lot of people. What we did is we looked at our domain. So this is for Mural itself. This is a project that we're doing right now, a research project to look at jobs to be done. And what we did was kind of from the bottom up, we thought about our domain, remote work collaboration broadly, what we do, and all of the things that people are trying to get done, kind of at a very granular level. And we had people just put down different ideas, and then we clustered them into some kind of key types of use cases, right? So you can use Mural for design thinking and innovation, for agile planning and lean, for business strategy and design and things like that, for instruction and teaching. So we came up with these clusters, and then we started to look at, okay, what are the high-level themes? How do we describe across all of those different things that people are doing in our industry, in our domain? What are some of the high-level themes that emerge? And we started to kind of zero in on what a core functional job might be. So in the second step, what we did is we kind of reduced all of that bottom-up thinking into a single statement around the core functional job. And here's what we believe our core functional job is. We may change the wording on this, but basically it's to solve creative problems together, visually and online. So kind of the need that we fulfill is solving creative problems. It's not a math problem or a management problem. It's you're trying to solve creative problems, and you're trying to do that as a team. And we felt we needed to add visually and online to qualify it a little more. If we had just left it to solve creative problems, we felt that would have been a little bit too high level, because Mural is all about visual problem solving as well too. So that's where we are right now with our core functional job. And once we had that, then we started looking at who's the job executor. And we used the stakeholder map to kind of think about, again, our industry and the segments that we're targeting, and what are all the possible roles and kind of functions that people have. And we use the bullseye framework here to kind of set up a target, and we move the ones that are more relevant to that job towards the center. We kind of zoomed in on, a design thought leader or a creative thought leader, a design leader in an organization as being one of the core job executors. And they interact with other people, but we really wanted to put that kind of role at the center. In the next step of the job executor section here, we just created a quick proto-persona. So we have Sophia, and that's just a way to give that a name instead of calling this person a job executor. We can now refer to her as Sophia. So this was an assumption persona. It wasn't necessarily based on segmentation research. We just wanted to put a name to that job executor. Over here on the far right, by the way, I have the sources of information. So these are all links. You can add links right into Mural of video interviews that we did and a lot of field interviews that we did as well, too. Some of these have multiple participants. So we were going out and collecting feedback from the market, not talking to them about how did they come in contact with Mural, because again, it's not about us selling Mural. It's not about us selling a drill, right? It's about what are you trying to get done in the space that we're targeting. And that's what we had these conversations about. From those interviews, what we were able to do is extract, now I'm gonna slide on down here to the job map. We were able to extract all of the functional, social, and emotional jobs as well too. So you do that by a process of combing. You listen to the interviews or you read them and you go through, and when you hear a trigger word, which is usually a verb, you can ask the participant, what did you do right before that? What did you do right after that? And when you do enough of these observations and interviews, you can kind of then put together a job map. So the job map that we have here is plan, prepare, orient, collaborate, find patterns, consolidate, share, and continue. And we have some sub-steps for each one of those phases. So the first thing you need to do when you create a job map is create the phases or the stages of executing the job. Again, this isn't about making a purchase. This is about trying to get done what you use that product or solution for, ultimately will do. What's the fundamental need? And once you have that, then you can then also order underneath it the functional, the social, and the emotional jobs. And that's what we did here. Again, this is through combing through the research. We more or less oriented these jobs to be done here, the functional jobs, underneath the stages that they apply to. And there's a certain pattern for doing this. And I just wanted to show that pattern. So each of these is formulated in a very consistent way. And it has three different elements. The first is it has a direction verb up at front. So if it's a goal, that means the customer needs to change something. They want to change something. They want to move from A to B. And in that change, there's either going to be an increase or a decrease. So these statements usually begin with the word maximize, increase, or raise if you're moving something upward, or minimize, decrease, and lower if you're moving it lower. So they want to minimize the time, and that's the unit of measure. That's what we're looking at. So we're trying to minimize the time, and then there's a qualifier here at the end. It takes to prepare for collaboration. So one of the sub-functional jobs that we discovered that rolls up into that core functional job is people want to minimize the time it takes to prepare for collaboration. And that's what this collection, these blue sticky notes here, really represent. It's really for our formulation of all of the jobs that we could find. And it's important to be as comprehensive as possible when you're doing this. So you want to make sure you get all of the jobs out here. In the next step, and I know I'm going through this really quickly, I'll give you some more resources where you can learn more about that. But in the next step, and this is where it gets really interesting, what you want to do is prioritize all of the functional jobs. And you can also do that with the social and emotional jobs, but I find it's better if you just start with the functional jobs and prioritize them. And what you want to do is prioritize them along two dimensions. And the first is you want to say, how important is that to the job executor, to the person? And then on the other dimension, you want to look at how satisfied are they completing that job given the current tools and solutions they have available to them, not just ours, but in general. And if you look at things along those two dimensions, what you find out is that there's an opportunity here in the upper left. And I call that an opportunity because these are the most important jobs that are currently least satisfied. So the idea of like where to play, right, it doesn't have to be random, that we can actually, through observation and looking at the market through this jobs to be done lens, and I really do think jobs to be done is a lens, it's a way of seeing a problem, that you can almost pinpoint opportunity, that we know that the chance of these ideas here or addressing these jobs will have a better chance for innovation than by targeting something that's already very well satisfied, for instance. So that's the process in a nutshell, and I've laid that out here in a very simplified form. What's the core functional job? Who's the job executor? What's the job map look like? And then against the job map, you can do the functional, social, and emotional jobs. You can correlate that to each of the stages. But then what you want to do is prioritize them, and you can prioritize them in a survey. So we haven't done this step yet, so we're in the process of doing this. We're going to survey our market and see what they say for each of the core functional or the sub-functional jobs rather, how do they rank importance and satisfaction? So we'll actually get a quantified metric around what are the least satisfied needs. I talk about this in a case study in my book. So my book, Mapping Experiences, I have this case study called Combining Mental Model Diagrams with Jobs to be Done. And I talk about a case study. I've done this a couple times in the companies that I've worked for in the past. But this particular one comes with a group of people that I worked with at Citrix. And I talk about, the conclusion of how you find that opportunity and what you do with it. I also have a blog post on that too. So here's a link to the blog post. We can send this around afterwards. I'll put the link in the chat as soon as I'm done talking here. You can read a little bit more about that case study there. And again, this framework is a simplified version of what Tony Olwick talks about in his book, Jobs to be Done, which I think is a very specific deep dive on what Mark and Parker were talking about around where to play. In particular, how do we find out where to play by looking at the customer need as the impetus, as the source of inspiration for strategic innovation as well too. So again, we're going to make this template available. It won't have any of this stuff in it, but it'll be a blank template if you guys want to try that out on yourself. And I'd love to hear your successes or even your failures in doing that as well too. So with that, I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen now, and I'm going to hand it back over to Mark and Parker to finish up the presentation. So over to you, Parker.
Great. Jim, that was excellent. Thank you very much. And it's a great dovetail back into how we in the Art of Opportunity help people to find that opportunity. One of the ways for trying to play that back with someone is what we call our opportunity report. You go through a set of observations, activities, etc., in order to then play this back internally and to show that process. You can see up here where we had a focus in the beginning of this report, which is in Mural, that can be used to create it, where you can either look at the customer or we have a term for a non-customer in the book, but that's really opening up your opportunities. The critical part here is what we've been going over in strategic innovation is really understanding the customer and their needs and the experience itself. That comes out as you do your observations with the customer and the firm and the ecosystem, as Mark was saying, and it leads to an opportunity. From that, you gain the insights that you use in creating a breakthrough question of how might we do that and for whom, when you identify very clearly that audience, what kind of barriers you're going to overcome, and what do you need to get there. And then you start building that strategy once you have that clearly identified, where you'll figure out what is your offering, how do you build a revenue model, how do you build a business model, and it's all in service of putting the customer at the center and creating value for the customer, for the firm, and the ecosystem itself. Let's go to the next slide. One of the things in the book that we've got are sets of activities. This is a persona map. It is used by many people that are involved with design thinking, business design thinking. It was in that upper quadrant. Jim uses it in the experience mapping, but it's really a deep dive into understanding the customer themselves. When you truly understand the customer, you'll have a better way of interacting, of communicating, of meeting their needs, their expectations. When you do this, you can see you in our case, very simply draw a picture, and then you kind of go from the outside in. You want to look and see what kinds of things are they hearing and seeing and doing, saying, and then you climb inside their head and clearly understand what they're feeling and thinking. By getting those insights and opportunities, you're then able to move better through the job mapping or the experience mapping, we believe. You can go to the next slide. Here's our big picture of the experience you get when you get involved with the book itself. You can see where we go at a very high level about strategic innovation, what that is, and then the process of discovering your growth opportunity, which is where we've been focused today. And then you build out your strategy, launch your business, and then we have this method that we call business design thinking that has visual thinking and storytelling, co-creation using multidisciplinary teams, active iteration, taking a systems perspective, and putting your customers at the very center itself. I do want to speak to gaining those insights, really, whether you do individual interviews, group interviews, you go out and observe. The key is to go out there, to actively be involved with that. And then you come back in and do your ideation and the job to be done under the social, emotional, or whatever filter. Gain insights, set up your prioritization, and then really target, because you understand your customer or client, what's that least satisfied opportunity that you're going to address. So that's kind of putting it all together, going from big back to small, focusing on that job to be done. Here's the book. Why don't we go to another slide? I'll tell you that we have a workshop, funny thing, coming up in the San Francisco Bay Area. Those of you that can make it to the beautiful Bay or are from there, it's March 15 and 16. We've still got some early bird that you can sign up for and save some money. And there are team packages also for those that participate. That's about it. Next slide, Jim. I think maybe over to you. If we've got any questions, we'd be happy to answer those. Right?
Yeah, thanks for that, Parker. We do have a question. I think it's going to go right back to you because you were starting to talk about research. So we did get a question about researching. How do you go about researching customer needs in the way that we've been talking about them? And I know you talked about getting out, but maybe you could be more specific.
Well, it's a great area, and we do touch on that in the book. There are a myriad of ways, and I think it really deals with the context. It's what are your resources, how big or how long or how great is this challenge that's thrown before you? Are you a startup? Are you a huge global organization? And then that helps you define how much effort you can put into and what's the best way to go out there. As I mentioned, there is literally, you can do online questionnaires, you can reach into user groups, you can do one-on-one interviews, you can do group interviews, or you do kind of the anthropological way of go out and observe people in the actual process of whatever it is that you think is the job to be done. Watch them, and you can either do it as a remote observer where you don't even speak at all, you're just sitting in and taking notes, etc., or you actually participate and engage and ask questions, etc. So those are a few of the variety of ways. The key then is, what do you do with it? We often find that it's really important to pull back together your core team. Best to have a diverse team, so there are diverse thinkers, and then hopefully you all have participated in various things. You come together, you do ideation around what did we hear, what did we see, some of the things that you talked about, Jim, in that process that you go through, the key questions to ask. You put them all up on a wall, and then you start synthesizing it and narrowing it down, and from out of that, you'll come with your insights and key questions, and then you try to narrow it down into a breakthrough question and put your prioritization. So that's a long-winded answer, but the answer is it depends.
Yeah, it does, and I really appreciate your pragmatic approach to it, and that's kind of what I've taken in my experience and my research as well too, is that you have to look at the time that you have, the resources that you have. I think the important thing for me is that it's grounded in reality. What you don't want to do is just get a bunch of guys in a room and just kind of make it up. Because even if you're close to your customers, you might get most of it right, but you're going to miss the important stuff. And so you need to get that validation type of input, whether it's online interviews or full ethnographic studies, right?
Absolutely. And I think, the value of Mural is you may be wildly dispersed throughout the globe, and you do some of that kicking around. And then the key thing we say is now get outside, go have the experience, and through active iteration, then you come back together and talk about it. And then you go out again and come back, and you keep refining it and refining it.
Right, exactly. And I'm glad you mentioned mural there, because I did react negatively when you said you put it up all on a wall. I don't know. I'm kind of allergic to the word wall right now. Now that I work at Mural, I said, no, you put it up in a mural. But yeah, you put it up on a wall. I do that too. But you can put it in Mural, of course. So thanks for that little plug.
You bet.
I had a question around segmentation too that came in from Matt, and I don't know if this is maybe better for Marc too. But at what point, because before you go out and talk to somebody, you have to decide who you're going to talk to. So there might be a kind of a chicken or an egg in terms of segmentation. And particularly when you talk about non-customers, how do you segment non-customers?
Well, very often companies have already in mind kind of a customer group that they would like to address. Usually who is buying your stuff, who is not buying your stuff. So,
right.
So making a list of that, who is not buying your stuff and that you always wanted to have as a customer is a great start, I think. And then, so finding those, we had a project with a hotel chain where we actually asked about, okay, why are people not staying in this hotel, or who is not staying in this hotel? And we just went to other hotels, and we just talked to people saying, why are you staying here and not at the one across the street, for example? So once you know who your non-customers are, I guess it shouldn't be too difficult to find them.
Yeah, and I love the idea of going to other hotels because, and you mentioned at the beginning of your presentation, Marc, too, is that the source of innovation, it's going to be hard to get that type of exponential growth by talking to your own customer base. So you need to kind of break out of that, right?
Yeah, really, if you're looking for big time growth, you're really not going to find it with your most satisfied customers, because the most satisfied customers, they buy already whatever they can, and they won't have much more possibilities for increasing the volume. So if you want to have big growth and new growth outside of your core, even maybe you really need to go out and look at non-customers, right, or unsatisfied customers, and think about how can we turn these into actual customers and generate new growth from them.
Right, exactly. Fantastic. I got a couple more questions here about jobs to be done, in particular the job map. So maybe this is a little bit more for me, but I'd love to hear what your guys' opinion is on it as well too. Tom writes, how does the job map work in a customer environment where the customer offering is more about an emotional or behavioral change instead of the physical process? And I think what you're getting at there, Tom, is kind of the difference between the functional job to be done, the social job to be done, and the emotional job to be done. There's a couple of theories about how to approach that. And I'm not sure where I personally sit on there, so I'd love to see what Marc and Parker think about that. But if you read Tony Olwick and his particular method, he says you need to solve for the functional job to be done before you can address the emotional job to be done. So, which isn't to say the emotional job isn't important, or maybe it's more important. But in the mind of the customer, if the functional job isn't served, you can't get to that emotional job either. So he always recommends to start with the functional job. And when I've tried to replicate the method that I just outlined, that's what I've done as well too. It starts getting very messy in the emotional and the social area as well too. They're a lot. The unit of measure is a lot fuzzier, and it's a lot harder to measure as well too. So I tend to stick with that. Although I have spoken to people like Des Trainer from Intercom, and he says no, you can address the emotional need. And you need to account for them as well too. And we do see lots of products that start out by addressing a social need or an emotional need as well too. So I'm not sure what you think, Marc. I think I heard you there. The difference between functional, social, and emotional, and how do you target those, or how do you balance those with each other?
Yeah, one of my favorite examples to outline the differences between these needs is going to a restaurant and the restaurant experience. So I think if your need is to get food quickly, you could go to a fast food thing, right? But if your need is to spend a good time with your friends, which would be more of a social need, then you need to provide, if that's the reason why people come to your restaurant, I think you need to provide a whole different experience to satisfy that social need. And one of those one of the ingredients of that experience, let's say, is that it should take some time before food arrives, because you want to spend the time with your friends, have the opportunity to chat with them, and then obviously maybe the food needs to be of a certain quality to satisfy also that functional need that you're eating there, but it's not the primary reason why people might go to the restaurant, but it's more about, as I said, spending time with your friends. So I think that you should try to solve primarily for that social need, while not forgetting the functional need, right? At the same time, I mean, if you're going with your friends and you pick the restaurant, there is always there, and it's a new place, maybe the emotional need that you want to have chosen something that pleases to everybody, right? Same thing if your emotional need is more about spending a romantic dinner with your spouse, then the setting might be a completely different one than if you're going for the rather social need to spend a good time with your friends, right? So I think there might be the primary need might be on the social side and the emotional side, and you want to solve for that first before then taking care of the functional side.
Yeah, and I think I totally agree with that, Mark. And I think too, it also has to do with the level of the market maturity, you know, the service or the product that you're in too. What I tend to see as a pattern, maybe I'm just making this up in my mind, but more mature industries, more mature markets will start rising. The value that you create does start gravitating more towards the emotional and the social, because the functional may be commoditized. Right. So then the differentiation that you're going to get strategically does come from that emotional. But if, you know, you're in a startup, a new field, tech startup that's, breaking into a new kind of technology, that functional need might be more in the foreground because the industry or the market is younger.
Yeah, I had somebody showed a picture of two smartphones lately, and the one was an iPhone, and then the other one was some Chinese phone, and then they listed all the features below, and the Chinese won on all of these features.
Right.
So a better camera, more space, faster processor, and so on and so forth. But the iPhone actually, I mean, it's still, I guess, the most bought smartphone on the planet. It has nothing to do with that functional need anymore, right? So I think that speaks to what you just suggested, that in the mature market, then it becomes more the emotional needs that is fulfilled, right?
Yeah, it's funny. I literally yesterday was having a conversation with a client who's at a major global tech firm, and they're wildly innovative, putting out some innovative products, but they haven't been able to meet and I used the same analogy, Mark, which was funny, and they had phones, well, you might have a better phone, but the trouble is when you put them side by side, Apple managed to create this image of they're actually selling cool. They're selling in the know, hip, cutting edge. And so that's why people will buy it. So it crosses over. I call it a lot of times, playing poker sometimes, there's table stakes. They're just so, as you were saying, Jim, you gotta check off I meet the functional need, okay, done. But then what's it all about? And you got to make sure, if that's your edge, that you deliver on the social or emotional.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I had another question here too about what sort of client education do you find useful to engage in prior to enacting these methods? And I'm going to pass that right back over to both of you too. You engage a lot more with clients in a consulting kind of role too. But particularly the way that you started out, Mark, it's kind of like traditional strategy kind of needs a twist these days, and that might not be the easiest message to get across right off the bat with a client, right?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm not saying that, or we are not suggesting that traditional strategy doesn't work anymore, or that you should completely forget about traditional strategy. But the thing is that more and more people and clients, they kind of encounter the limits of these traditional approaches. Again, specifically when it is about finding new growth. And then if you are in such a situation, then I think it's worth to look at a different opportunity, right? And to look at different approaches to answering your questions. So mostly people come to us, or companies come to us, because they have troubles and the traditional ways of doing stuff doesn't work anymore.
I see. So you don't necessarily have to convince them to, work in the way that you guys outline in the book, that they're coming to you already because they know that that's what they're going to get from you. Is that the situation?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. I think, as a looking at it from a consultant perspective, if you have to convince your client, then it's always a difficult start.
Do you have any thoughts on that, Parker?
Yeah, they oftentimes, really are looking for a new way of, we call it a new way of working or a new approach, because whatever they've done isn't getting the job done. And they've gone through traditional, or growth hasn't been as strong, or clarity and understanding is not as good, or they don't get as much of a buy-in, or they're putting a new tech platform in, but they're not getting the uptick, and they want to know, so what do we do wrong, or what are the barriers, or what can you do differently or in a different manner with a different approach that's going to help us get there. And that's a different way of looking at it, different way of actually executing, a different way of building strategy, and that hopefully gets them the results that they're trying to achieve.
What I want to add is still so in terms of, because the question was around client education, I think, right?
Yeah.
I do believe that before starting a process like this, spending some time on educating the client in terms of, okay, this is what we're going to do, this is why we're going to do it, and this is the process that we're going to go through together, has tremendous value. So that you don't, you just have clarity of what the journey is going to look like before you go there. And so I think that client education is still very important. So I would like to spend, or what we do typically do is, I would suggest that you spend a day or two on training on the methodology, so to say, before you go out and then you do it.
Yeah, and we even, as we go through it, we lay that out. It's a visual experience map. We go through that process. It depends on how deep and how wide the engagement is, but show them, here's what's going to happen, and here's where we are. The breadcrumb shows you at the beginning. And then every time we're back or through the phases or otherwise, we say, here's where we've been, here's where we are today, here's where we're going to be at the end of the week or at the end of the day. So they know, they have that grounding. Okay, I can see where I'm going. I know where I've been. I know where we're going to go. And that really is helpful.
Yeah, and that's one thing I love about the book, is that it not only is it complete and comprehensive, but it's also very visual, and you use your own way of thinking on the way that you present your own materials as well too. That is, if we're going to be working collaboratively and visually, that's how you present the method as well too. So it wouldn't make sense to go in and present what we just laid out here today quickly in a PowerPoint deck with bullet points, and then say, okay, now we're going to do that with sticky notes on the wall. That you actually combine the explanation of your techniques with some of the kind of approach that you're going to take anyway on that. But actually, no, the real answer to the question is, if you want to educate your clients, send them to our workshop in San Francisco. How's that? How's that for a softball? I just teed up there. Yeah. But the follow up on that thought that I had, though, it's great. Matt couldn't join us. Matt Morasky, one of the co-authors of the book, but Matt actually has a design background, which is interesting to me because that's kind of where I come from too. And it's fascinating to me that one of the three authors on this new business strategy book comes from a design background. And without Matt being here, I don't want to talk about it behind your back. But from your perspective, Parker and Mark, what was the benefit of having the designer there, helping you put this together?
I'll jump, and then Mark, you add to it. One of our core beliefs, one of our core values, is having a diverse set of minds when you're tackling complex problems, issues, initiatives. And we recognized neither Mark nor I are brilliant designers, and it's core to our foundation of how a new way of working, of storytelling, visualization. And we got one of the best in the biz with Matt, and he's what we call a unicorn. He not only is a good consultant, but he's a brilliant designer. So that we had the diversity of thought and the ability to do storytelling and seeing a systems perspective and applying it with the experiential learning. And we thought that was critical for our success. You have and we all brought something to the team, and we are all very different, and we have different nationalities, different values, different cultural backgrounds, and it really made for a better project.
Fascinating.
Yeah, I think, I mean, when we started writing the book, so because I had done the research already, and I had some pretty clear ideas in my mind on what it should look like. But the first couple of months really of writing the book was more about telling Matt and Parker about the ideas and the structures and everything I had in mind, so that Matt could actually visualize everything and lay out everything, so that then we could take those structures and those visuals and then applying to the book. And if you go to the website, we have a couple of pictures also floating around Twitter and the Instagram account, where you actually see us with huge walls and visualizing everything and laying out everything.
It was really fun, because we literally saw the I call it the dinosaur bones, the entire skeleton, before we started writing a word. Came out of, you know, Marc's inspiration, us pounding on it, asking questions. Why here? Where should it be experiential? How do people need to learn? How will they go through this experience of the book to make sure that it's impactful? And seeing it first and then working on it was really great.
Yeah, and you just touched on a really interesting topic too, Parker, about being fun. And there's this concept out there around, they call it serious play, right? Which is, not fun in the sense of I'm playing Candy Crush or whatever, is that it's an engaging, exciting, visual, interactive way of looking at your strategic problems. And that's really what your book, I think, embodies, is kind of that new approach. So when I say serious play, how does that hit you guys in terms of where you are?
Yeah, I think it's definitely. I mean, the first time I came across serious play was using Lego bricks in workshops. So I think that, the whole idea is really that you take away the seriousness of looking at an Excel chart or a PowerPoint presentation, and you really try to engage people. So I mean, it becomes playful in the sense that everybody is really engaged, and it's a co-creation exercise, and everybody wants to contribute. And you can do that with Lego, but you can also do it very often. We just did a series of workshops in Paris with a large organization, and it's amazing how well people respond to having them just being on their feet for the whole workshop. No possibility to sit down, because they were so busy working with Post-its and working with charts and templates on the wall. So it just makes a lot of fun, right? And at the same time, you get to a very serious outcome that everybody agrees upon, because everybody has been engaged in co-creating it, the solution or the outcome.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And, I like you said, everybody being involved too, because I think strategy isn't something that, guys in white lab coats do at an offsite and then come back and hand it back to the organization. That I think this modern approach to strategy that you're talking about really does need to be collaborative and involve people, right?
Yeah, and that's, I think, the beauty of Mural also. I mean, the new way of working is about engagement, co-creation, collaboration, diverse teams, and active iteration. And especially when you're tackling really complex issues, it can't be done in a vacuum. And we, as humans, we like to get up off the bench. We want to play or participate, not sit and have somebody talk at us and to be passive. It doesn't get as strong a result.
Right. Exactly. Well, that's great. I think we're a little bit over our scheduled time right now. So we're coming up at the end of the half hour right now. And I think we can wrap it up there. The questions are dwindling. So we're going to post a recording of this session on our blog. That's blog.mural.co. blog.mural.co. We'll put a full recording of the session. We'll throw the slides up there as well too. I'll also put a link to this template that I created in Mural. You can go out and get it. If you have a Mural account, you can just click on that template and add it over to your account. So you can copy this into your account. I have some of the links that I talked about in that template as well too. So you can find out more about the art of innovation, art of opportunity, that case study that I talked about, and a little bit more about jobs to be done as well too. So with that, I think we're going to wrap up. You had one more thing to show or say. Is that right, Parker or Marc? There we go.
That's basically it.
Or close it out. And true. And Jim, thank you so much. Really, we love working with you, and we'll look forward to doing this again.
Yeah, likewise. Parker and Mark, thanks so much for joining me. And with that, we'll end the session. So thanks for joining, everyone. Have a good rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye now.